Thank you, Alise. The floor is yours.
Today, I will talk a little bit about the photographic archive of Zenta Dzividzynska, a Latvian artist and photographer active locally and internationally during the 1960s. I'll talk a little bit about how her photographs became invisible, and I'll discuss some recent efforts to make them visible again. And just for context, this is part of a broader research project that I'm working on right now, where I explore ways of thinking about invisible photography in the way that I'm interested in the medium as practice or a form of social interaction instead of this fine arts approach that emphasizes only select images as the great masterpieces. First, a couple of words about the background on Zenta Dzividzynska's artistic career. She was quite an acknowledged young photographer in the 1960s and when she was in her early 20s. And her success was also quite unusual or untypical in the sense that she was one of the very few women photographers exhibiting at the time. And although there were some other women among her colleagues, I just wanted to show you this group portrait of the leading Latvian photo club where Dzividzynska is the only woman photographer present. And this photo is from 1971. And this image just perfectly captures the patriarchal nature of the photography establishment of the time. And it's not unique to Latvia, it's not unique probably to the Baltic states and to the, I think it was pretty global. And I very much like the words how Annika just said that in her presentation, this male genius, female nude photographer, because that is, of course, what happened also here. And what is also, I think, especially important, the prints that brought Dzividzynska recognition in the 1960s fit very well within this aesthetics of the mainstream photographic art of the time. And the subjects were such as female nude, a pair of horses in a sunlit meadow, a young mother nursing a baby, and so on. So that was the kind of work that gained her recognition from this male group, let's say. However, most of her creative work in photography was leading to a different and more experimental visual language that did not so well fit into this mainstream photographic art of the time. And at the center of Dzividzynska's legacy is a vast collection of hundreds of images like this one that I put on the slide. Experimental and exploratory self-portraits, collaborative and oftentimes performative work produced together with other young women artists and fellow students at the art school in Riga in the mid-1960s, as well as candid documentary images depicting the daily life of her own family in a small house in Latvian countryside. From today's perspective, Dzividzynska's work could be called feminist or proto-feminist or something alike, but it's also important to acknowledge that the artist herself at the time did not use such terms, and also the Western ideas of feminism as they took shape in the 1960s were not circulating in Latvia in the 1960s. For that reason, I would also not, how to say, would not put her into this feminist art box. But at the time of the making of these images, the existing establishment of photographic art, as it was called back in the day, did not acknowledge these kinds of images as even worthy of exhibiting or discussing. And in other words, her images did not have an audience yet. And for this reason, most of these images from the 60s either have not been printed at all, or were printed only as part of contact sheets or as small test prints, many of them meant to be given away to the friends who collaborated in the process of making the images, and so on. And moreover, after Dividzinska dropped out of the regular photo club activities in the early 1970s, her name was soon forgotten completely, and the artist herself did not revisit her photo archive for almost 3 decades. And this dropping out happened because in the early 1970s, she chose a career of a graphic designer, and put the negatives, prints, exhibition catalogs, books, equipment, photo magazines, and everything else photo-related, put everything away in the attic, where they stayed untouched until the late 1990s and early 2000s, when some interest in her work took shape, and Dividzinska herself began to revisit some parts of her archive. But at the time of her passing in 2011, the exact content of her estates was also unknown, because no systematic research and archiving ever had taken place. Boxes full of unsorted papers, prints of various sizes, negatives, books, notes, documents, and all kinds of miscellanea were kept in a temporary storage space on the outskirts of Riga. And then in 2021, an artistic intervention took place that offered one way in which to approach this long neglected and overlooked legacy, and make at least some part of Dividzinska's photographic work visible again. And it began with the interest from curator Zanne Onskule, the artistic director of Contemporary Art Center Kim in Riga. She knew Dividzinska, knew about her work, and she had envisioned a collaboration between the photographer's archive, the practice of a contemporary artist, and the labor of an archivist. And then Onskule invited Austrian contemporary artist and photographer Sophie Thun to exhibit her own work, as well as to study Dividzinska's archive. And parallel to that, Onskule also invited an archivist, Luig Goldberger, to sort, record, and describe the archive's contents, because it hasn't been done ever before. And this collaboration resulted in the solo show of Sophie Thun in Riga in late summer of 2021 that also prominently featured Dividzinska's archive. So during the exhibition, part of Dividzinska's archive was moved to the gallery space, and it became an object, an exhibit. And throughout the run of the exhibition, archivist Luig Goldberger worked with the archive in the gallery space. She opened the boxes where the family had kept Dividzinska's archive, looked at the items, and described their contents. And meanwhile, another part of the gallery space was turned into a functioning darkroom. That was where artist Sophie Thun was working on a regular basis during the exhibition. Thun studied Dividzinska's negatives and printed new images from them on site in this exhibition space. And Thun referred to her practice as interpreting Dividzinska's work. I think it's a very interesting approach, how to look at this process when somebody prints from somebody else's negatives. Thun was thinking about this process along the lines of music, where there are also composers write their musical scores, and then different performers come and interpret these scores when they perform. And both of these activities, archival research and darkroom work, oftentimes are part of preparation stage for an art exhibition, but typically they are completed before the exhibition opens, and they also remain strictly behind the scenes, while the spectators only see the end result, printed final images and perhaps selected images from, selected objects from the artist's archive. And here, on the contrary, in this exhibition, this invisible labor was made visible, and not only visible, but actually turned into the centerpiece of the exhibition. So, at the opening of the exhibition, there were these empty panels. And there were some works on view. There were some works from Dividzinska, from a museum collection, and also some of Thun's previous work. But in the main room there were these empty panels. And the results of Thun's interpretation of Dividzinska's negatives were only visible at the closing of the exhibition, because during the exhibition, Thun put up new images on these panels as she printed them, one by one. So it was a process that took place from the opening until the very last day of the exhibition. So in a way, Dividzinska's images remained invisible or partly invisible throughout the exhibition, and the complete view was available only for a short while during the basically during the very last day of the exhibition. And this is just another close-up of this panel of images that were printed by Sophie Thun, and in the foreground here there are some examples of Dividzinska's contact sheet books. To summarize what this collaboration did, I think departing from the concepts of kinship, collaboration, and affective labor, Onskule, Thun, and Goldberga engaged with Dividzinska's archive to create a new kind of evolving space for a conversation, and also by physically bringing Dividzinska's archive into the gallery space, the exhibition attempted to reverse the history that too often has overlooked and forgotten women photographers' work. And just making Dividzinska's legacy visible, I think, was one of the main goals of the exhibition project. Let me show you just a couple of examples where the exhibition was discussed. And I think it's the exhibition provided a basis to begin a conversation about these issues, because, for example, most researchers, also museum curators, collectors, they are typically interested in these great artworks. They look for large size, excellent quality, well-preserved vintage prints ready for framing and exhibiting. But Dividzinska, for example, did not even make that many exhibition-size prints during the 1960s while she was an active photographer. And partly because her most radical work at the time was not even considered exhibitable, or so it was not even worthwhile to invest into making into these exhibition prints. And this conversation, I think, has already led to some tangible results. For example, after the exhibition, part of Dividzinska's archive found a permanent home at the Latvian National Library, which I think is great because it will be taken care of professionally and it will be available to researchers for future work. And several previously unexhibited prints were also selected by curator Elita Ansone at the Latvian National Museum of Art and included in the new permanent display of Latvian post-war art, which by itself is a great stride forward in the process of accepting photography as an integral part of the broader art historical narrative in Latvia. And moreover, Sophie Thun's interpretations of Dividzinska's negatives have somehow woven themselves into Toon's own artistic practice and continue to show up in her subsequent projects. And for example, Toon included works made from Dividzinska's negatives in her solo exhibition that took place in Vienna early this year. So you can see these are all self-portraits by Zenta Dividzinska here, all interpreted by Sophie Toon. And these images that feature some female nude, they are also part of this performative collaborative work that Dividzinska did together with other other young artists at the art school. And similarly, excuse me, something happened. I wanted to show you this slide. Yes, Dividzinska's images interpreted by Toon also have found their way into the artist's next solo show in Kunstverein Hildesheim, Trials and Tributes, which actually opened just a few days ago on May 8th. So this also, at the center is a self-portrait by Zenta Dividzinska, but interpreted by Sophie Toon and a part of her upcoming solo exhibition. So far, this was just a very brief insight into a photographic practice that had become invisible because of several circumstances. And now, many decades later, there is this artistic intervention that attempts to make it visible again. And working with this archive, I think also mobilized several broader issues of private photo archive preservation, especially archives of women photographers whose careers may have taken place on the margins, not only on the margins of the art world, but even outside the field of what was considered professional photography or photographic art. Thank you.